All right, so let me just let you know, Lisa, right now we have attendees coming in, so we will probably we have a bunch of attendees coming in, so
Great.
we'll probably have some, and someone's hand is already up.
All right, so I'll start my introduction and then you can be letting people in. So it is January 17th. Oh, wait, no, it's not. I'm looking at the minutes on the last meeting. It's February 21st, 2023. It is 7:06 and I am commencing the regular meeting of the Common Council Ordinance Committee meeting. And what I'll first do is roll call. I see Mr. Livingston, Mr. Hoovelman, Brian Meek, Nora Najalsko-Eitner. There we are. I have two Noras, as it turns out. So meeting. I'm expecting Mr. Kamucha and Mr. Goldstein to join us. So when they do, Brian, maybe you could just note for the minutes when they join our meeting.
Sure.
So I'm going to open with public hearing. So I understand that there's a few people in the waiting room. So if you, Brian, want to go through and
Sure.
give people an opportunity to speak, that would be great.
Do you want me to read the email that I have first while people are coming in, just to give them a little bit more? Because right now we have 3 participants with hands raised, and my
that would be
email is
great.
pretty short to read.
Fantastic. Let's
All right,
do it.
so again, this is an email for public comment concerning one of the items on the agenda, which is gas-powered leaf blowers. This is from Priscilla Farrell, president of Friends of Animals, 777 Post Road, Darien, Connecticut, 06820. As a Rowayton resident and president of the environmental animal advocacy group, Friends of Animals, I support a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers in Norwalk because of air and noise pollution. We consider gas-powered leaf blowers a profound environmental hazard of lawn care, as they spew out more pollution than 6,200-pound Ford F-150 SVT Raptor pickup truck. These blowers also stir up dust that contains pollen, mold, animal feces, heavy metals, and chemicals from herbicides and pesticides. All of this adds up to increase life-threatening conditions. We understand that gas-powered blowers contaminate our property and create smog pollution. Such noise and disturbance are health risks to Norwalk's residents, the environment, birds, and other animals. Also, as we've learned, powerful electric and battery-operated blowers can do the job, and at the purchase price of about $400 are about the same price when one subtracts the cost of fuel. They're much cleaner and less noisy. Please vote to allow Norwalk to prohibit gas-powered leaf blowers. Thank you, Priscilla. So that is the only email that I received. We have 4 people with their hands raised. So I'm just going to go in order in which they're located here. The first one is, we have more people raising their hand, but I'm going to start with Jim. Jim, you can unmute yourself and you can lower your hand, and you have the floor for public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jim Shell. I live at 165 Philo Street, which is Oak Hills Park Golf Course. I'd like to review some statistics of a comparison between an electric blower and a gas blower. The electric blower statistics are from the most powerful backpack unit that I could find, and the gas is the one we use, not the most powerful gas blower available. So the electric one is a Greenworks 82 volt commercial grade, and the one that we use is a Redmax 7500. The cubic feet per minute, which is a volume of air that comes out of the nozzle on the electric, is 690. On the gas, it's 770. So there's obviously a difference there. The mile per hour in speed of the wind coming out of the chute is 195 on the Greenworks and 236 on the Redmax. The runtime for the Greenworks electric is 34 minutes with 2 batteries. With the gas blower, it is unlimited virtually. You stop to fill up. The electric blower also loses power in the cold, and as it gets older, it loses power. With the gas blower, there's no loss because of the cold, and as it ages, yes, it gets a little less powerful, but you replace a $35 part and you're good to go. There's a potential danger with the electric batteries. The lithium battery fires are common regardless of how you store them. And it could mean for us up to $1 million loss when our facility burns down. And the gas blower, when there's no danger, and if it's stored correctly. So that's something to consider also. Weburn just lost 40 golf carts, and we believe it was because of the lithium batteries that power the carts that caused the fire. That wasn't the only thing they lost. They lost a lot of equipment too. So the electric blower, the charge time is 40 minutes. And the refill time is 1 to 2 minutes for a gas blower. Yes, the noise is 73 decibels at the ear for the electric blower and 103 decibels at the ear with the gas blower. The electric blower cost is $900. The gas blower cost is $600. The weight of the electric blower with the batteries is 28 pounds, and the weight with the gas blower is 23 pounds. Summing it up, the gas powered blowers have the advantage with more power by a lot, longer runtime with very little interruption in use, no potential fire when it's idle damage. There's no potential damage there from fire. We hear about houses burning down all the time because of electric bicycles with bad batteries, blah, blah, blah. There's a $300 cost difference. They are 5 pounds lighter for my guys to be a little more comfortable throughout the day in the fall when we have to use them all day long. And yeah, the electric blower, the advantages are less noise. But this is the reason that we have noise ordinances. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jim.
Mr. Shell. Who's next?
Lisa, just for the record, Councilman Camacho came in at about 7:10, just for the
Great, thank
record.
you.
Yep.
Great. We're looking
right.
for Josh in a minute. Yep. So our next speaker.
Yep, our next speaker is going to be Luis Washer. Luis, you can unmute yourself and lower your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I'm Louise Washer. I'm a resident of Norwalk. I'm also president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. And I'm commenting today in favor of this gas leaf blower ordinance on behalf of the Watershed Association, and it's over 2,000 members and participants. Our mission at the Norwalk River Watershed Association is to protect water quality and wildlife habitat in the Norwalk River watershed. Gas leaf blowers are a threat to both. The 200-mile-per-hour winds, or we just heard how fast they go, almost 200 miles per hour, destroy wildlife habitat, especially ground nesting bees and other insects. And as part of our work for the pollinator pathway, we have a real focus on protecting ground nesting solitary bees. The gas leaf blowers affect water because they desiccate the soil, and therefore, especially when the blowing is happening just to get grass clippings off during the summer, they desiccate the soil, and therefore those lawns that are blown need much more water. And that is becoming more and more of a challenge for our watershed, since we're seeing regular droughts like we did last summer, and like we had a 5-year drought a few years before that. And the more outdoor watering means reduced flow in our rivers, which means less water in our rivers to dilute the polluted runoff that enters it each day. So that's a part of why we're commenting today. I mean, the primary concerns with gas leaf blowers are really to human health. So as just a member of the community in Norwalk, I wanted to comment on those. The air pollution between the fine particulate matter, which is especially concerning and was like really alarming to me to read about. A single backpack blower emits 30 million micrograms of particulate matter per hour. And that is like fine matter that stays in the air suspended for as much as a week. It's so fine that when you breathe it in, it can go through the lung tissue and into the blood, where studies show that it causes cancer and a host of other problems. So this is just an issue that, I don't know, I think we really have to pay attention to. And then in addition, these two-stroke engines are releasing hydrocarbons. The chemicals that come out of those releases include the 4 top cancer-causing compounds: benzene, butadiene, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide. These are the things we're putting into the air. And just the CO2 emissions, just from a climate change standpoint. We just heard that statistic about the Ford F100 truck. It's, running a gas leaf blower for 30 minutes is the same as driving that truck from Texas to Alaska. So it was just not something that I think we're going to be seeing in the future, these two-stroke engines. I mean, as we all have to work to achieve climate, reform, we're not going to be using these. So I feel like we should be a leader. Norwalk is an environmental leader. Let's lead on this issue. Let's join the other 200 communities, including our neighbors in Westport, that are adding common sense restrictions to gas leaf blower use. And that's my comments. Thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Louise.
Louise. Okay, next is Joseph Pramer. Joseph, if you could unmute yourself and lower your hand, and please go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I'm a resident of Norwalk for 65 plus years. Live on Lancaster Drive for the past 32 years. I've been on your side of the table. I've served on the Harbor Management Commission back in the 80s and 90s during the weaving of commercial. I was representing for the commercial fishermen. We weaved commercial use, residential use, and retail use. More recently, I've served as a trustee of the Norwalk Pension Board last 14 years. So I understand the time and effort that you all put in to what you're doing tonight. I appreciate speaking. I'm speaking to you tonight as a do-it-yourself resident. I try and do as much work around my house as I can, save some money, more economical. I have one acre of property. I use many tools to make my job as easy, as economical, and as safe as possible. Lawn mowers, hedge trimmers, weed whackers, power washers, snow blower, chainsaws, log splitter. Yes, leaf blowers, which all, by the way, are hazardous to infants, children, and pregnant women. All those tools are. I don't use them around pregnant women or kids or something like that. I own and use both the gas-powered leaf blower as well as a newer battery-powered leaf blowers, which, by the way, I prefer. They're easier, and for me, they're lighter, they're cheaper, and they're quieter. But for the heavy lifting that I use for half a dozen times a year, for the big leaves in this fall cleanup and the spring cleanup, I need the power of a gas blower to move the heavier debris. But like I said, that's only half a dozen times a year. I use my blower for more than leaves on my lawn. I use it to clean my gutters. I use it to take the leaves off the side of the road in front of my house, off the street. I blow the leaves up underneath my hemlocks, making it safe for people walking and cars. I also clear the storm drain in front of my house. I use it during pollen season for the cars and windows and the walkway, so I don't carry the pollen into my house. Contrary to some of the other topics during the public speaking session and other comments on November 15th, I found a number of environmental benefits of having a clean, dry lawn. After I'm done cleaning my lawn, having iced tea on my back deck overlooking my lawn, I watch squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, and birds all come out and feast on the acorns and on the worms and things like that are uncovered by the leaves. At dusk, the deer come out and they also feed in my lawn. Also, removing the wet leaves from the lawn and around my house keeps down the mosquitoes and ticks without spraying pesticides. I'd much rather do that than put pesticides down because I have a well. Lastly, my compost pile, which I turn regularly, gives me plenty of topsoil for my planting of flowers, vegetables, and shoring up my bushes in the spring. Those are some of the benefits I get out of keeping my yard looking good. I'd like to address the leaf blower ordinance that you have before you tonight. I understand the reason why most of the complaints are noise related, which can be a nuisance, but a lot of things that we deal with, each and every one of us are a nuisance in different ways. Let me tell you how we deal with it. One time I had a tree down. I was going to in my front yard. I took a chainsaw and I was about to start working on it. My neighbor popped her head over the fence. Hey, I'm having some people over. Would you mind not doing that right now? No problem. The nice thing about a do-it-yourself person is that we don't have any deadlines, and I put her off until it was more convenient for the neighborhood. Now, the ordinance itself, it starts out with the city of Norwalk finds and declares that leaf blowers represent a significant source of environmental pollution in the form of, so on. So I don't want to read the whole thing. But what I do want to know is I'd like to know who in the city of Norwalk made this declaration. I checked the minutes with the zoning board, the health department, the mayor's office, DPW, corporate counsel. I Googled and looked up everything else in the minutes of other agencies. I didn't find any. I'd like to have the records reflect as accurate as we can. All I could find out was November and January minutes of this committee, which contained public complaints and a PowerPoint presentation from a Fairfield resident who is an advocate on helping other communities banning gas power blowers. So the question is, who in the city of Norwalk? I'm okay with whoever it is. I'd just like to know who it is. Is it this committee? Is it the ordinance committee that made that declaration? Or is it someone else within the city of Norwalk? Just want to know who that is. Here's my frustration with banning. It's a powerful procedure. I believe we're losing sight of a much larger picture. The issue is noise and pollution. I get it. Like I stated earlier, I've lived in this city for 65 years. I've seen a lot over the years, some good, some bad, in my own opinion. Our own town of Norwalk has turned into a large city. I've seen development of houses, stores, offices on pieces of land that I couldn't believe it could happen. Taking away trees, woodlands, marshland, natural beauty, natural buffer of noise pollution for the sake of progress. I know this is not your wheelhouse, but this is my frustration. An example, look at what's going on in the corridors of 95 and the Mirror Parkway. Not your wheelhouse, get it, I know that, but it's unbelievable what's happening. Talk about noise pollution and the buffer. I understand.
So, Mr. Kramer, I appreciate your comments. It's unfortunately, we have to limit it to 3 minutes. So would you, I have to respect the fact that there's others who are in line behind you. So if you
Yep.
could wrap up your comments, that would be helpful.
I'll wrap it up right now. You have
Oh, thank
before you have before you an ordinance that wants to ban the use of leaf blower. Half a dozen times a year, I use it. Please work with us, do-it-yourself residents. You might not use the tools that we use, but you might know a brother, uncle, father, grandfather that does use these tools. Keep my little piece of property clean. Limit the use. Don't ban it. Promote neighbor-to-neighbor communication. Believe me, the electric mower is the way to go. We're not quite there yet. The American way, build it, make it better, and we'll buy it. But forcing it this way is, in my opinion, the wrong way to go. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
for your
Kramer.
time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pramer. Let me just get the next person. Oh, and just for the record, Councilman Goldstein showed up at 7:18.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, next is Robert DeBisegli. Oh, sorry, Roberta. I'm sorry. I thought it was Robert. Roberta,
That's
please
okay.
unmute yourself and you can speak. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Yes, Roberta DeBisegli. I am the owner of a fine landscape gardening company and consultant for the Norwalk Pollinator Pathway. I've lived in Norwalk for almost 20 years. I stopped using gas-powered equipment in my company several years ago when battery-powered equipment became cheaper and easier to use. I'm going to keep this really short because Louise Washer basically touched on everything that I wanted to say. So I want to just put myself on the record as being in alignment with her about the negative impacts on the environment. Gas-powered leaf blowers are overused and abused. Leaf blowers, in my experience, are primarily useful to clear lawns. And in my opinion, there are far too many lawns in Fairfield County as it is. I think most of us can appreciate that. I don't think I need to go into a whole educational piece about the problems, the environmental problems of lawns in terms of abusing water and all sorts of other things to make them green. So that's all I have to say. I fully support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta. Anyone else, Brian? Are we?
Yeah, we have 5 more.
Okay.
Next is just going in order here. Diane Lauricella. Diane, you can lower your hand, unmute yourself, and please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me this evening? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Shanahan and the members of the committee and staff. For the record, my name is Diane Lauricella at 21 Little Fox Lane. I have lived in Norwalk a little over 37 years. Tonight I wanted to applaud this committee for tackling or taking on the incentive of reducing the use of internal combustion gas-powered leaf blowers. I wanted to thank you because it's a health issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a commerce issue, but it's also a community issue. I agree with some previous speakers. They spoke the things I was going to mention. That's Louise Washer from NRWA, Priscilla Farrell, and Roberta Di Bisceglie. I wanted to state for the record that I once, most recently lived in a homeowner association. And when the landscape company, in order to hop to the next client, oftentimes there would be 3 or 4 backpacks, gas-powered backpacks that would encircle the home I was living in, renting. And by the time that they were finished with the lawn surrounding, we were all tightly packed together in a homeowner's situation. The entire home smelled like gasoline. It penetrated the walls, the windows. My eyes were burning. And this is an issue for not only residents, also, of course, for the workers. And I do really thank you for adding the safety measures for workers as well. There are some changes I wanted to just suggest in the time I have remaining. The first is what you have is, I guess, XX3. I guess it'll one day be a section. And that would be, I really think that we should move to prohibiting one year earlier. I think 2026 for less than 3 acres is far too long. The technology will improve, and then for those with over 3 acres, 2027 is far too long. I propose either 2026 or 2025. I think it's far too long to extend. I think we can, and there are ways that I have some solutions on maybe getting to this ban sooner. Under XX4, it says required safety features. I just wanted to suggest in, I guess, section B of that, subsection B, that you include under persons who operate, please include electric as far as operations safety, and include eye protection. Because even if it was an electric leaf blower, it's going to be kicking up stones, either be it, no matter what the source of power is for that leaf blower. Eye protection is very important. Some of you know I was once an OSHA trainer. So please consider adding electric use, because we should have safety precautions with electric use for the workers as well. Ear as well as eye protection. Under hours of operation, I wanted to suggest maybe some adjustments. Saturday, make it an hour earlier, and Sunday, make it an hour later. Of course, that's a tough issue, and I leave it up to you to sample what is reasonable. I also wanted to suggest the following, that this ordinance includes some incentivizing, or at least a pledge that the city will help incentivize those to modify their behavior with use of coupons, rebates, subsidies, especially a needs-based subsidy. Right now we have money through the IRA and the ARPA monies. This is a climate change issue as well as an environmental issue and a green jobs issue. So please try to consider incentivizing. I also ask, and I'll wrap up, education and outreach should be a part of every ordinance that this council and the city puts together. Without having an education and outreach section, what has happened with some of our other important environmental needs, such as recycling and other things, you will find that we won't embrace this. We will not embrace this in the manner that I know you have good intention. Also consider repair shops and dealerships as far as when they need to stop selling. Of course, many people get things online, but dealerships in Norwalk and repair shops in Norwalk, that they need to help educate and suggest that we switch to electric. Lastly, I wanted to say I am in great solidarity with the purpose as stated for this ordinance, but I do also want this committee to take up sooner rather than later the lack of enforcement of our noise ordinance, which many of you know I was very involved with. As a former harbor management commissioner under Bill Collins, while I appreciate a previous speaker's suggestion that they do care, of course, about the environment, the harbor, and the like, because of that, I cannot say roundly enough that we must move away from gas-powered leaf blowers. So I thank you for taking this up. I think you still need to do a little more tweaking, not quite ready for prime time. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. We have next is Jess Parker. Jess, please unmute yourself, lower your hand, and
Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Parker, and I'm a resident of Norwalk, and I'm also on the board of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all here today, and I'm speaking in support of the gas-powered leaf blower ban. So as we all know, leaf blowers are really loud, and as other people have pointed out, they produce sounds in the range of 95 to 115 decibels. And as we all know, that low frequency sound makes it through everything, through walls, through windows. So it's not as simple as just going inside and trying to stay away from it when someone has one running. And exposure to this type of noise is bad for both people and animals. For us humans, it can cause hearing loss, increased stress, disturbances to sleep, and interruptions to concentration for both kids and adults. And then for animals, it interferes with their communication and ability to gather food, to sleep, and do all the things they need to do to maintain healthy populations. And then as Louise Washer mentioned, another big negative impact of the gas leaf blowers is the harm they do to pollinators like bees, butterflies, and other insects. Some of these creatures spend important parts of their life cycles living in the fallen leaves. And when we blow those away, we're severely disrupting their ability to reproduce and maintain healthy populations. And in a way, we're doing ourselves a double disservice with that one, because many of the beautiful trees and flowers that we're landscaping to take care of in the first place actually rely on healthy pollinator populations to grow, bloom, and fruit each year. So I think the issue here really isn't about preventing people from taking care of their yards or businesses taking care of their properties. It's about rethinking how we take care of the land and acknowledging that there might be a better way to do this that reduces harm to both people and wildlife. Thank you all for your time and the opportunity to speak in support of the leaf blower ban.
Thank you, Jess.
thank you, Jess. Next is Fred Zinser. Fred, please unmute yourself, lower your hand, and please go ahead.
Good evening. Can you just, can you hear me? I was having trouble with my speaker before. Okay,
We can hear you.
thank you. So I'm opposed to banning leaf blowers. I've lived in Norwalk now for 47 years. I'm retired. I'm on June Bar Lane. It's a third of an acre. And I have a backpack blower. I use it twice in the fall, 45 minutes each time, and once in the spring for 45 minutes. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've got two neighbors who tried electric blowers, but they switched back to gas after a few years. It was, they could get half of their front yard done, and then they'd have to either replace the battery, which is expensive, or wait till it was recharged again. And it didn't have the power of the gas blowers. So this morning when Brian called me and told me that there was a hearing tonight on it, I checked around with some of the other towns to see what their ordinance was. And I looked at New Canaan, And they had what I would consider a thoughtful ordinance. It limits the noise, the decibel level at the property line where the blower is being used. Which makes sense. I mean, given if you have a 10-acre piece of property and you want to clear a section of it off, you're not going to cause the same noise level to your neighbors that you would if you had a 1/4 acre of land. Then I turned to Stamford. Stamford limits the use of blowers to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays and 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekends. Westport limits blowers. I'm sorry, Westport blowers can't be used on state and federal holidays. They can be used only they can be used from May 15th to October 14th between 8 and 6, Monday through Friday, and 9 to 3 on Saturday. They can't be used on Sunday. Now, I'll admit, I've seen situations where armies of lawn maintenance crews descend on a single property with multiple backpack blowers and wheel-based push blowers. And I mean, it makes you feel like you're living on a runway at JFK. But I think these situations can be limited if the restriction is on middays between 9 to 5, or on the weekends, especially if schools are, if children are in schools, then it would it'd be safer to have these hordes of blowers running during the week, and then not having them on Sunday, which causes a disturbance for everybody. So the last thing I did was I tried to see where the objections were coming from with respect to the leaf blowers. And I looked online for people soliciting the signatures in opposition of leaf blowers. And frankly, I couldn't find any petitions that had what you would call a significant number of signatures in opposition to leaf blowers. I found one that was out of Hartford. They were hoping to get 1,000 signatures. The petition had been hanging out there for 18 months, and they only had 191 signatures out of the 1,000 that they were looking for. So I think it's a situation where you got a vocal minority and a silent majority that are in conflict here with regard to leaf blowers. And that's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zinser.
Thank you, Fred. Next is Tyson. You can unmute yourself and lower your hand. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Tyson Canavary, and I'm a Norwalk resident, 54 years, 5th generation, and I own Signature Landscaping here in Norwalk. Been in business now for since 1999. And, I'm kind of puzzled on this whole ban on the leaf blower thing. I think if you use it in a responsible manner, you can coexist, because frankly, we've looked into, a lot of us landscapers have looked into these battery operated machines, and frankly, they don't work. They're just not effective enough for us to use. I would love to use it, but they just are not powerful enough. They're not cost effective enough. And frankly, there's not enough of them out there for us to purchase. You can't find them. They're great for a homeowner to use. I will admit that. For a homeowner that has a small little property and just wants to blow their walkway or their deck, yeah, they're wonderful. But when you're doing commercial properties, or you're making a living doing it, they're just not effective. For instance, say here in Norwalk, I do a townhouse property with 30 homes in there. We just can't do it with battery operated equipment. It's just not effective. And we try to be responsible when we do properties. You know, people are saying you're damaging the waterways, you're damaging the wildlife. We don't purposely go into the waterways and disturb it. We don't try to disturb the leaf litter out in the woods. We actually, when we do fall cleanups, we actually remove the leaves and we bring them to a farm where they use it for compost. They turn that every year and use it for their crop at a local farm. So, you know, you can't just blanket statement and say that we're all out there recklessly blowing everything and damaging the air and making noise to disturb people. I think that's a false statement. Is there guys out there that are reckless? Yes, but that's in any field. You know, I would stand behind you making some kind of noise ordinance where Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, guys shouldn't be out there with blowers making noise. You know, I don't like to hear it either. But I think it's wrong to just make a blanket statement of let's ban all gas blowers, because you're also damaging the guys that make a living doing it. And I think also you're going to have people start cutting down trees, because if you're telling us we can't blow the leaves with it, there people are going to say, well, let's start cutting down the trees. I don't want leaves on the yard, because that's the nature of the beast in Fairfield County. People like that Versailles look. Not everybody wants leaves on their yard all the time. That's just the way they are. They like that nice clean look, and that's Fairfield County. Some people, you know, will say, yeah, leave the leaves for the leaf litter on the lawn, but the majority of them like their sprinklers running. They like a nice green lawn and they don't want it dirty. That's what I would say. And I think you're going to have a hard time to police it if you do. And my other question would be, are you going to institute the same rule for Parks and Rec? Because how are they going to take care of the beach? How are they going to take care of Betts Park? How are they going to take care of Cranberry Park? Because I've addressed this with Ken Hughes, and he said there's no way that battery operated equipment can take care of those parks. It's just, one, it's not cost effective for them. And two, it would cost them a fortune to switch over to all that stuff. He said it would take 10 batteries to do the job, a half-hour job of one of their gas blowers. So I know in Westport, they exempted the Parks and Rec, which means they're admitting that these things are not effective out in the field. So I think you should take that into consideration as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tyson.
Thank you, Tyson.
Next, we have Lisa Henderson. Lisa, you can lower your hand and unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Good, thank you. I'm Lisa Henderson, Tough Lawn Service in Norwalk, Connecticut. Tonight, I'm not only speaking for our company, and we've been in business for 34 years and are a very responsible business, but also for the many small and individually owned landscape businesses, many that we work with and whom English is not their first language and don't have any idea that this ordinance is even being discussed. So I do think that you need to have better outreach if this is going to be further discussed. The proposed ordinance to ban gas leaf blowers should be tabled until technology is improved for commercial use. While we realize that gas blowers can be loud for the operator, electric leaf blowers are equally loud and take longer to complete a task due to the short battery life. The proposed ordinance not only applies to landscapers, but homeowners. The ordinance was written and presented without any input from landscape professionals or homeowners. Do you expect small landscaper businesses, especially single owner minority businesses, which there are many in Norwalk, how do you expect them to find out about this, that this is even on the table? Not only will the ordinance have an economic impact on both the landscape industry and homeowners, but increased costs in the landscape industry will be passed on to homeowners in several ways. The time to perform work will be greatly increased. because electric leaf blowers are less efficient at performing tasks. Landscapers will need to invest in remote charging stations, potentially loud generators on the back of their trucks to keep the batteries charged. Landscapers will need to replace gas leaf blowers with battery powered ones, which is a major expense. In addition to these costs, short battery life from a maximum of 30 minutes to less than 10 minutes in turbo mode will make it impossible to perform our professional duties. We're not Westport or Greenwich. Westport's ordinance is a feel-good ordinance with no fines attached to it, and I was at those meetings. The town of Westport's departments will not adhere to the Westport ordinance and are going to be exempt and may use gas blowers when the ordinance takes effect. Will Norwalk do the same and exempt DPW, NPS, and recreations and parks? That is not fair to the landscaper or homeowner community. Currently, the proposed ordinance selectively targets only leaf blowers. There are many other gas-powered pieces of equipment that are in use that you're not even discussing. Leaf blowers are a staple of the small business and individual owner landscaper. The proposed ordinance disproportionately targets small and individually owned businesses, which is neither fair nor equitable. Many small landscape businesses employ mostly minority workers. Individual landscapers are often minority owners themselves who struggle to make a daily living. It's unreasonable to expect small and individually run businesses and homeowners, all of whom have been severely impacted financially over the past few years during the COVID pandemic, to now be forced to purchase new equipment at a substantial cost. Coming out of a pandemic is no time to push these businesses to the brink of failure due to additional equipment and labor costs and government-imposed impediments to efficiency. We're requesting that you table this proposed ordinance until technology further advances and it becomes economically feasible for small and individually run businesses as well as homeowners to embrace the new technology and afford the additional expenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or are we?
We have two more.
Okay, great.
Anthony Lima, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Anthony, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, thanks for hearing my testimony. My name is Anthony Lima. I live on Fairfield Ave in South Norwalk. I'm testifying in support of the ban. I just heard about it recently, and I'm really actually begging you to implement the ban. It's pretty long overdue. For the last 2 years, I recently moved. Previously, I lived on Flax Hill Road, which was just down the block, kind of on the hill that's like overlooking Sono. And I wanted to give a first-person account of really how often these leaf blowers are being used, and I guess what they're really, being used for. So I'm living in a townhome, maybe one of the townhomes that was mentioned previously. I don't know. But every Tuesday, the landscaping company would come and would do various landscaping tasks, but the majority of that was leaf blowing. They were also doing my complex and the two complexes next to us. They would do it for probably like 6 hours a day. And I'm talking, and they're leaf blowing every Tuesday. Maybe 4 weeks out of the year are they actually moving leaves. The rest of the time, it's moving dirt. They're just like blowing off like minor road debris that genuinely did not need to be cleaned up. Obviously, this has health effects. It's really annoying to the other people living in the condos. I talked to them, tried to talk to my landlord. He pointed me to the condo association. Turns out they don't manage it. We have a property management company, which is pretty typical. They're operated out of, I believe they're operated out of New Haven. I call them. They just gave the contract to a landscaping company who was supposed to come every week to do this. I even went out and talked to the guys leaf blowing. I'm asking them why they're leaf blowing, like why are you moving this around? It really doesn't need to be done, and it's very disturbing to me, the neighbors, and the other people who are working from home. And it really just comes down to I don't know why. Maybe it's just busy work or something like that. I don't know why why we're even blowing the dirt off the pavement. And this is just for my complex. While I was living there, because I'm sitting up on the hill, I could hear leaf blowers every single day of the week. And I'm not just being hyperbolic here. I really mean it. You could hear them every day of the week. We've heard before, like from other people testifying about how the negative health effects from having this high, like elevated noise. There are studies showing that anything above 70 dB has health effects. We're talking about heart disease, cognitive impairment of children, sleep disorders. And then that's not even to mention the catastrophic pollution that's coming from the leaf blowers. I'm also a do-it-myself person. At my new place, I clean out the gutters. I use rakes, but I don't really feel entitled to burning a gas two-stroke engine and releasing all these pollutants and harassing my neighbors with 110 decibels of like a whining two-stroke motor. The job, if it really has to be done with a blower, it can be done with an electric blower. And then I don't see why we're putting up such a fight to ban this, really just outdated technology. So, from a health perspective, from an environmental perspective, I think this is a close case, decision, and I really hope we implement this ban. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you.
So you said there's one more in the participants, and then Dana wants to speak because
We have
she's a-
2 more now in the participants.
okay, good. And then Dana will get to you
Yeah.
at the end. We promise.
Yep. Okay. Next is Lawrence. Lawrence, you can unmute yourself and lower your hand, and please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Lawrence Kaisema. I'm a resident homeowner in Norwalk, and I generally favor environmental regulation. In fact, I've volunteered with Louise Washer, and I grow specific pollinator plants in my yard, but I believe that the gas-powered leaf blowers are needed. I've got an acre of property myself with over 20 trees, and the foliage is beautiful, but in the autumn, they drop over a ton of leaves, literally over 2,000 pounds of dry leaves that need to be moved. So that volume of leaves over that season is just way too much for me to rake. It's even more challenging, try to get through landscaped areas and bushes and ground cover, vines, steep hills, and so forth on the property. And I've got a bad back, which makes raking more than a small patch pretty much impossible. And with all due respect to folks on the call, to hire landscapers would be prohibitively expensive for me. So I need to use a leaf blower as a physical and financially feasible solution. Battery powers would be great, but they don't yet have the sufficient power duration to do the job, as others mentioned earlier. So I don't object to some reasonable restrictions on hours, as long as working homeowners can have the ability to utilize blowers on the weekends, Saturdays, and Sundays. But an outright ban would not be reasonable or practical for many homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Just before we get to the next person, Mary Varel was waiting to speak, and she just wrote in the Q&A section, "I want to add my support of the leaf blower ban." Just wanted that noted, because she was waiting for a while to speak.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Next is Todd Bryant. Todd, you can unmute yourself, lower your hand, and please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. And here we are again, folks. Thanks again for continuing to consider the modifications to the demolition ordinance. I do have one little technical thing that just might clarify one section of the ordinance. I'm sorry I didn't get to email this earlier. It's section 55-4, item C, where it says, "or is a historic property." And I think that would be, you could clarify that by saying listed in the state or national register of historic places. So there's no question about what a historic property actually is.
Wait, Todd, could you say that one more time? So that's in section D. Tom, did you get that? comment?
Yeah, so actually, there was one more thing. So listed in the property that's listed in the state or national register of historic places or the Norwalk Historic Resource Inventory. That clarifies that, so there's no question about what a historic property is for the purposes of this ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing is there was a lot of discussion about the National Register's 50-year rule. So I did some research and I discovered that there is exactly one article that goes into the history of the 50-year rule. And it's in a book about the creation of the criteria for the National Register. And this is one chapter in that book. As it turns out, this is the only essay that has, as far as I can tell, ever been written on this. The Fairfield University Library had a copy, so I went up there. They've had it since 2015, and as far as I can tell, except for the librarian that opened it up and stamped the date that they got it, no one else has ever opened that book. But that aside, it was codified in 1950, based on lots of comments back and forth, lots of arm wrestling about what should there be a cutoff? If there is, what should it be? Eventually, they came down to that it was fair to wait 2 generations to decide whether something was historically significant. And that's why they came up with 50 years, roughly 2 generations. And then in 1967, and this is 16 years before the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. But once the National Register was established by that act, that 50-year standard was carried forward, and it exists today in that format.
Thank you for doing that research, Mr. Bryant.
Yeah, it was
Thank
pretty torturous, I have to say. I mean, it was hard for me to stay awake reading it. But is there anything that I can add to this discussion as a member of the public here?
Tom, did you want Todd to be available for questions and comments during the discussion of the ordinance?
I don't know that we need it. If he wants to stick around, we can ask, but I don't have any specific questions for him at this point.
Okay, great. And then Dana, Dana?
Thank you,
the last-
Todd.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, I also wanted to do Dana Laird, 214 Highland. I also wanted to just comment about the leaf blowers, as well as the demolition ordinance. While I was in college many decades ago, there was a machine that drove around and just swept up the leaves. I know the current trend is to have no leaf left behind. And yeah, we are just having these guys come out and mow grass clippings. I don't know if that's necessary. I'm also concerned about the health of the operators, the noise, the smell, etc., things blowing in their eyes. And then I'm just hoping we can get the 180-day delay, because 120 days is not really enough for us to get our ducks in a row to get something done for our city, to keep our history intact instead of just losing it right and left. I know we do have to have some progress, but it's hard to keep up in this town without having a 180 day delay would really help us help our character in town. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana.
So I think that closes our public comment at this time, unless you see anybody else, Brian,
No, there's no one else is raising their hand except Diane Lauricello, but she already had a chance to speak. She has been typing questions into the Q&A section. Lisa, what would you like to do? Would you like to end public comment?
I think unless there's, everybody got their 3 minutes, I believe, unless somebody has a new comment in there. I think that's the only fair way to proceed, right? If you had a chance to speak already.
Yeah, the only person who's raising their hand is Diane Laurachelle, and Diane had her moment to speak before. These items, none of these items, just for the record, none of these items are in the public hearing stage. So all of these items would have to come back again before any of them could go to common council anyway. So people would have the right to come back at the next meeting and make comments if they've already made comments during this meeting.
Exactly. And the leaf blowers for discussion purposes only tonight. So there need not be worries about us going to public hearing next meeting. All right, so I will close the public discussion right now, public comment session, and then we'll move on to acceptance of the minutes. The minutes are dated January 17th, 2023. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Mr. Livingston, thank you so much. I think there might be a few changes that people might have. I have one or two tiny little ones, Brian. I believe at one point, Mr. Jackson is referred to as Mr. Johnson. That's on page 4, paragraph.
What paragraph?
On the 4th paragraph on page 4. I don't think we had a Mr. Johnson there. I think we were referring to Mr. Jackson. Tom is
Okay.
speaking, but he's muted. And then I don't really love the next sentence, but I'm going to live with it. If other people have other comments of other changes to the minutes as listed. Seeing none.
No, it looks like Josh, are you
Yeah.
raising your hand?
You're muted.
Sorry. Hey, everyone. I muted myself. I thought I saw someone's name spelled incorrectly. But I don't want to hold up the train. So I don't see anything. Sorry, guys.
Okay, no worries. So all in favor of accepting the minutes as amended with that one change I made? Great. I know you're probably going to abstain, Mr. Meeks, because you weren't at the meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'm taking my video off, which is going haywire.
I know it's going haywire, so I just voted for you. Sorry to make the assumption that you were going to abstain. Okay, so now we're going to move forward on old business. The first conversation we're going to have is to discuss and vote in chapter 55, which is the demolition delay ordinance. And Mr. Livingston's been carrying the water on this.
Okay, thank you. What I thought I'd do, we've discussed this quite a bit. So what I'd like to do is highlight the changes that have been made since the last meeting and the rationale, and there's a couple open points to discuss. I'll also address Mr. Bryan's comment as well. So the first change was changes are in section 55-5, and it's A8 and B2. We discussed last time about how do we deal with properties across the street from the property in question, and the language here is language that we got from the Planning and Zoning Department. And so this addresses makes it easier to identify who they are. They're within 100 feet of any portion of the property to clearly identify who those are. So there's no question. In paragraph E, there was a question about what sort of process would be put in place in case there was a challenge, and this section incorporates language to say that Newark Historic Commission will have an obligation to hold a hearing if any applicant requests such a hearing, and it outlines the procedure for that. Mr. Camacho had asked for that before. On the fine section, and this is one of the issues we'll come back to. There was a question about having no open-ended fines. It could just, in theory, go on forever. So I just put in bracket a cap of $45,000, or in the case of an unauthorized demolition of building or part thereof, 10% of the assessed value. Brian had come up with that as sort of an alternative. It's a lesser of those two. The $45,000 was arrived by taking the $250 and multiplying it by possible 180 days, and that's how you get to $45,000. My feeling is this has to be meaningful. Otherwise, it's worthless, and 45,000 is meaningful. So is 10%. So we can talk about that more, but I just want to finish the other changes. And then I added the section again that Mr. Camacho had asked for on 55.9, just specifying that everybody has a right to appeal. I mean, that's in the law, but it doesn't hurt to have it in here. Just two other things I want to note. One, I'll address Mr. Brian's comment about historic property in 55.4. Historic property is defined in 55.2. Brian, you came up with that language. We can modify that definition to 55.2, or we leave it the way it is. I don't know if you have any feeling on that, Brian.
I don't have any feeling on that. I believe I took that definition straight from the general statutes.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to know, which is not in here, and this was at the suggestion of Mr. Ireland, who's here. I'm not going to go through the whole history of the Willow Street debacle, if you will, but one of the big concerns was that there is an exception in the current law for a homeowner to demolish a building on their own property. And that exception allowed the owner of Willow Street to avoid getting a permit, avoid having Mr. Ireland go out and inspect, and resulted in, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but exposed wires and other very dangerous situations on that site. And everybody has to remember that this ordinance is not just about demolition delay. It's about demolition permits as well. So let's keep that in mind. So what we think is going to be would help solve that problem is to remove one of the exceptions in section 55-7. If we take out the language of section 5, which currently accepts any structure that is exempt from the provisions of 29402C of the Connecticut General Statutes, that is the language that would exempt the homeowner from doing the property on a demolition of his own property without a permit from the building department. And so I'm proposing, again, it's not in the draft you see here now, have in front of you, but to remove that. Bill, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, or any other part of this.
The biggest part for me is the public safety of it. It's a travesty what you saw happen on Willow Street, but this ordinance would not have stopped that from happening because everything was done without a permit from the start. It was done by a homeowner who was pleading ignorance to the law. I think you have to take that coefficient out of everything, and no matter what, any type of demolition should go through our office for review prior to, no matter what it is. I'm not talking about an intent to demolish. I'm talking about a homeowner wanting to do his own demolition. Exposed wires were left there. The gas service was still hooked onto the house when I was there on that Saturday. The electric service was laying on the ground, still in full charge. We had to call Eversource ourselves from the building department to have Eversource come and shut down the electricity and stop the work that was going on. People were working there without hard hats. There was no safety issues covered at all, the way things were going on there that day I was there. And that is the common practice. What I see out there with non-licensed people and homeowners trying to do work themselves. A licensed contractor, and I'm talking just a B license, not the type A license as far as demolition, would have gone through the proper processes, because if he lost his license through the state, he'd be out of business. And it's much harder to get than a home improvement license or a contractor's license. And it's more than just a check clearing. They have to go through a rigor process to get their license. They would never let that happen to them to lose it. So I don't know how you could do it or how you could put it in there, but I think something like that should be considered in this ordinance.
Yeah, and that's why we're taking out that exception, so that they would be covered here.
And there's a couple other, I don't mind, if you don't mind, I'd like to point out a couple other things if we could.
Sure.
Just for quick information, in the minutes from that you just approved, it said they should be informed if the building is 50 years old. They are. Every demolition is producing a tax sheet. So, and that tell any demolition, tax sheet, so we see the age of the house when it was built. So that is in there now. And the other thing I read on here was Lisa said, I think it's Mr. Jackson was questioning if the property was sold. Right now it does go with the property, the ordinance, as far as the delay ordinance. And then the last thing I'd like to point out is the everything on here says any application for a permit to that seems to be referring to a demolition permit. This is an intent to demolish permit. So if they go through these steps, they're then allowed to take out a demolition permit. This is not the demolition permit, which a lot of these people have mistaken. They think when they get through this, they can go right into the demolition. And a lot of the things that are asked for and produced would come with the demolition permit itself. As far as work on the house, we had siding and asbestos is done by the state. They issued a permit and there's nothing we can do to stop them. I don't know how we can, but it's for public health and safety. So I just think that's something that we have to keep in mind, that they're allowed. All of a sudden you see siding come off the house, like I think we saw in South Norwalk. I forget what house it was, where the people were calling, but the state allowed them to take it off. So there's things we don't have control over as far as health, you know, asbestos siding, lead paint, whatever it may be. And inside the house, we have no say. And one more thing, if we could take a look at, I didn't quite, let's see, that would be, oh God. Let's see, 55-5, is it E? Where may issue recommendations on alternatives. The Historical Commission may issue recommendations on alternatives to the demolition to the chief building official. Shouldn't the alternatives go to the owner? I mean, if I mean, how can I enforce alternatives if the owner doesn't want to do them?
We can make that change. This was in the existing ordinance, but we can certainly
Right,
make.
I was just looking, yeah. That's about it. The 180 days doesn't bother me. 50 years doesn't bother me. Don't forget, this ordinance has worked for over 500 permits. So without a hiccup. So I think a little tweaking doesn't hurt it at all. But as far as going from 120 to 100, we started at 90 and we didn't have any episodes. Then they went to 120. And now 180 doesn't, you know, it's another bit of time for, you know, but if they do what they do and go through the format, of course, the objectioners or whatever could be pulled out. Right, because the Historical Commission could say there are no objections because they hold the hearing, correct?
That's correct.
Right, so if they say there's no validity to the objection, then the person can go into his demolition. And we had the episode where up on, oh God, Old Kings Highway where the state did nothing and that went way over 180 days. I think Todd remembers that one where they came down and they didn't, do anything and the demolition came through. And right now they're saying the same thing about Willow Street. That there's, they're not giving the city any type of advice how to handle this thing. Because they said, I don't know why, but it's out of their periphery, right, Brian? Isn't that what they're saying now?
What was that, Bill?
The state backed out of a couple of these. The attorney general from the state backed out of two demolitions and as far as assisting us. And now this one on Willow Street, they're not offering any, according to Jeffrey, they're not offering us anything as far as to remedy what happened.
Yeah, I haven't seen any response from the state
No.
consistent with what Bill's saying.
No, so 180 days, I think, is not a bad thing. I mean, as long as we don't hold the developer up unreasonable or a homeowner. Because it's not an architectural review. This is for historical only, really, is what I think it should be.
Thank you, Bill. Ed?
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I just had a question. Can the historical commission file an objection on its own if an application is made?
I didn't
Yes.
think so, but.
You don't think so? Well, I don't think they do. I don't think it says they can't. I don't believe
So
it
they
does.
can't, technically.
I don't
But
think
it-
they do. Well, Bill,
It's
do
a-
they?
I don't think they could. They hear the objection, has to come from an individual, not the
Right.
commission itself.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, if they file an objection, then they're conflicted, right? They can't hold the hearing.
I believe that's correct. I believe what Bill is saying is they can't do it. They have to listen to it.
All right, so no member of the commission can file an objection.
That's the way I
The
interpret it.
commission as a body can, but no member of the commission can either, unless they, well, I guess they would need to exempt themselves from the hearing. Since they're part of that body, it seems to me that they can't file an objection either.
Right. And the other thing should be in there. If they file an objection before the intent to demolish has been presented to us and issued, it means nothing. They can't file an objection for the sake of, we had that happen a couple times. We hadn't yet receive it, yet we received the objection and we can't hold on to it.
The time period to run comes after the notice of intent, and then they have, I believe, 21 days.
That's right.
Correct.
Ed, is that it? Do you have other questions?
Well, I mean, I've got a number of them, but I think I'll let Josh go, and then we can come back. I have a number of other questions if you want. So it's up to you.
Yeah. Josh?
Hey, Tom, just one question about, I think it's let me get the section right. 55.5D as in dog. There's a sentence about halfway through that says this about the objection. The sole basis for such objection shall be that the building structure or part thereof proposed to be demolished is not architecturally or historically significant. Shouldn't it be the opposite? It's that it is historically significant or architecturally significant.
You know, Ed and I talked about this. Yeah, you're right. That is absolutely right. I should have made that correction. I did talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, well,
Yeah.
why file the objection? Just
Yeah. No, you're right.
One other thing, I guess, a question, and I know we've kind of talked about this before. I kind of want to circle back on Todd's comment about the 50-year thing, because I thought Nora and I think some others made some persuasive arguments at our prior discussion last month about why 50 years, and that there are a lot of homes that could be up for demolition and aren't really of historic significance, and that further delay may not be to the benefit of the community. I guess Bill makes an interesting point in that people haven't abused this, but there are a lot of homes that were built in, I mean, 50 years ago, it's the 70s, that are still around and are not necessarily historically significant. So I guess my question would be, is it worth bumping up that number? Was that discussed? What are your thoughts?
I'll give my two responses to that. One, 50 years is the national standard and the state standard, as Todd mentioned. It's in the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. It was arrived at through compromise. I did find a legislative history in that. But more to the point, I don't think we as a commission are qualified to determine what we think is historical, right? I mean, I personally don't think I know. What we may think, or one of us may think is not important, may be to a trained historian important. That's why we're having it go to the Historic Commission to look at. For us to say that no building 50 years is important, I don't think makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, this definition of historic property doesn't include a year in here.
Well, that's a category, right?
Right. I mean, I guess so then what you're saying is, as a committee, we're not qualified to say what is qualified, what could be a qualified
Yeah.
property to be demolished. Isn't that exactly our job?
No, I mean, we're saying if we moved it, say 60 years, we're saying that we don't, as a committee, council, don't think any building 50 years old is worth saving.
Okay, all right.
How do we make that determination, Josh? I don't know. I don't feel qualified.
I didn't think that's what we were doing, but I understand your argument. But I also want to defer to other committee members who I see have their hands up.
We've
Brian.
had this 50 years from the inception of this ordinance, and very few homes have been objected to it. The last, well, we were back with Tom when I gave him the list. There's 136 demolitions, 3 objections, and only, I believe it's coming off the top of my head, only 1 was demolished, if I remember correctly.
That's what you told me.
Or
Yeah.
2 were demolished and 1 went through the process. So there's been it's been turned over really quick by the commission once they say, because we turned that application to to everybody who's requested it, and anyone who has objected, most of them have not been objected to, and those who have objected have satisfied the board as far as, or the commission as far as what has to be done or could be done. So I don't think the 50 years is crazy. It doesn't hurt anything.
Brian, did you have a question? Comment?
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, I'm probably not going to stick around to be able to vote no for this, which would be strictly on the basis of the 50-year rule. But maybe my mind could be changed. What I see around me, at least in Cranberry and most of Norwalk, is 4 out of 5 houses are at least 50 years old. What would stop me? Let's say my neighbor wanted to demolish his house and I knew I was having a graduation party or a wedding in my backyard that summer, just to stop him because I could stop him. What's to prevent someone from doing something like that? And keep in mind, I know most of the houses in Cranberry are not up to current code. They're 2x6, 24 on center in the rafters, which is not code. Aren't we really just, and forget, notwithstanding what this nitwit did, a stone's throw from City Hall, aren't we discouraging property improvement with this 50-year rule? And how does 50 years for a 300-year-old city really apply to a national standard?
Actually, Brian, let me take that in pieces. One, we actually, in this ordinance, that's the language that Josh referred to earlier with the error in it about not architecturally historically significant. We added that so that a neighbor just couldn't willy-nilly say, I don't like what you're doing, I'm objecting it. Currently there is no limitation on what a neighbor could do. So we added this in to make it more difficult for somebody to object to something. They had to have a real reason. So that was added for that reason you're saying. I don't know if you had a question for Bill about somebody demolishing.
Well, what I heard Brian mention was, a house not being to code. You have to remember that the code is not retroactive. So when it was built, it was. So just because a house is not to code does not mean it would be demolished. The only thing that would fall into that if it was in an unsafe state where it was collapsing or such. But to say it wasn't built to code really has no credence at all to this.
Thanks, Phil. I get the distinction.
Nora?
And Mr. Bryant, I really appreciate you going and doing the research on this topic in terms of where the 50-year rule came from. And I think the history you uncovered, it actually really points to exactly the point I'm trying to make. So this 50-year rule was developed in the context of a process by which specific properties could be sought to be designated because they had already been identified as properties of interest. And therefore, there was a process created by which to designate them as historic. That is the exact inverse of what our current ordinance does and what I'm objecting to continuing within this current ordinance, which is a blanket designation of all homes 50 years or older, with the ability to then, after you have already blanket designated them, then come back and make an argument that it is not in fact historic. So I completely agree with the 50-year mark as a great mark from which you can begin to advocate for a historic designation. That makes sense. But applying it as anything 50 years and older is therefore subject to additional review. Again, from my perspective, you're essentially trying to, identify a gem or a needle in a haystack, and you're designating the whole haystack. So it just, to my mind, I recognize on the one hand, Mr. Ireland's point that this has not been unduly burdensome in the sense that, it's only been 150 or 130 applications over the last couple of years. On the other hand, that's still 130 applications that have not generated, in fact, any significant historic preservation for the city. So why go through that whole process to achieve ultimately very little in the way of results here? I think we'd be much better off, moving forward, focused again on a sort of a process that identifies things that we want to preserve and actively works to preserve them, fundraises for them, generates homeowner interest around them, engages people in conversations about their property. I think that that's a much more constructive way of addressing this problem, particularly again, given the need to ultimately be working on increasing our housing stock, increasing our affordable housing stock, increasing our climate resilient housing stock. I think that this regulation, again, from my perspective, just sends the wrong message in terms of what our sort of priorities as a city are in relation to balancing regulation with the objective of encouraging constructive and safe development. So anyway, I really do appreciate the effort that's gone into it. I recognize that there are other issues that this ordinance is attempting to solve, but I still sort of flounder on the fundamental 50-year issue. The other question I did want to ask in relation to Mr. Ireland's comments, I understand the concern that he's raising very much about individual homeowners doing their own demolition, but can we override that state statute which permits that by changing our own local ordinance? Because I would be sort of surprised if we could do so. So I'll flag that as a particular question. I will, however, continue to be a no vote for the ordinance on the basis of the 50 years at this point. Thanks.
Brian can answer that. Nora, just before you go, I mean, I hear your point. I will say that having read part of the legislative history, not the whole thing of the act, it wasn't quite the same as the earlier act that Brian first mentioned. I mean, Brian first mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, but anyway, the chair has her hand up. I think she's entitled to speak.
No, I just have a question for Nora because I don't know what to do with your objection. So I'm just trying to figure out what your ideal ordinance would be, because at this point, this is on the books already, and we've got the 50-year rule already, and every other jurisdiction, it seems, uses 50 as the standard. So I'm really trying to hear your objection, but I'm also really trying to understand how it would possibly work. Because, cities such as ours, I mean, we would love to have that good inventory of every historical house in Norwalk, but I know what's real, and we're not going to get that list, not anytime soon. So what in the alternative, would you pick a different year? Would you just not have this to be something that we try to protect at all? Like, I'm just trying to understand what the alternative rule that you prefer to see.
So as I understand it from Mr. Bryant, the inventory is in process. I think the anticipation is that it's still, a year to 18 months from completion, but that is in the scheme of ordinances, not a very long time. So I personally would default to a situation where only items that are on the historical inventory are subject to this regulation, specifically in terms of the delay portion. So I believe that would be in essence that I'm looking at the language here.
But just to kind of take that to the next logical conclusion is that list would be a photograph of a list of, we'll call it 200 homes, but every year as houses get older and different things happen, I mean, this would be something that would always have to be updated. I just feel as though that's just something that's almost impractical to really actually gather all of the houses that might really truly be subject to something important being saved. And we can
I would feel like that's actually a very viable expectation of the historical commission would be to maintain such an inventory, right? I mean, that seems to me like a fairly reasonable assignment to the historical commission in terms of their responsibilities. And again, listening to the stats that Mr. Ireland has put forward, we're probably not talking about a huge number of buildings being designated, right? I mean, this is not an instance where this is a city of, 800 million people, of which, and 200 million buildings, and there's 50,000 new buildings going up every year or whatever. I mean, this is a relatively small city with a relatively discrete number of historic buildings that remain. And so again, I think the question becomes, where do we put the burden? Do we put the burden on homeowners? Do we put the burden on the city? And I think it's much more appropriate in this instance to put the burden on the city. This is a city objective. And it's also, quite frankly, hard for homeowners to know. Again, we've talked about this before in other meetings. It's not like there's a designation on your deed. It's not like you're getting a warning when you purchase, this home is subject to a 50-year requirement or whatever. I think it would make much more sense, again, to avoid the kinds of situations, whether the homeowner on Willow Street was or was not genuinely aware, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we can debate, we don't have information on that, but I think the point is we should have homeowners on notice. It makes much more sense to have homeowners on notice on a very limited sort of number of houses. Again, this seems to me to be sort of a very broad brush solution to what is ultimately a fairly narrow problem. I mean, again, as Mr. Bryant has pointed out, we already have a number of historic districts designated in the city. Homeowners in those historic districts are then sort of already have been alerted to this potential concern. Do we really need an additional layer on top of that? I feel like there's already layers of protection for most of what's likely to actually be of concern. And I think the fact that the reality is that we haven't, in fact, blocked demolitions suggests that, in fact, this ordinance is perhaps broader than really needed to achieve the objective.
Can I just respond quickly?
Yeah, that's what I say. Brian, can you respond to?
Yeah. So the exception that we're trying to take out deals with the state licensing that Bill was talking about. The penalty provision for failing to go through the permitting process with the local building official can also be found in Scope of Municipal Powers, Section 7-148, which empowers the local building official to create demolition ordinances, for the city to create demolition ordinances that the chief building official will oversee. Part of that has to do with the safety aspect that we've talked about, and pursuant to that statute, we're allowed to fine $250 a day per violation. So we're not trying to bypass or circumvent a law that was on the books in any other way. One of them talks about state licensing, and when you don't need a state license, but what we're talking about is when you're going to do a notice of intent to demolish and then get a demolition permit, you still have to go through the chief building official and go through the appropriate processes so that there is public safety when these things are going on, such as wires, gas, things that Bill mentioned. So I think they're two different things.
Okay, great. So we can require them to get a demolition permit even if they are not required to get a license from the state.
That is the position of our department. Yes.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Well, that's great. I mean, because certainly I agree from a safety perspective, it would be far preferable to have them permitted. So
Right.
that does make sense to remove that.
Right, because the way that statute reads, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, that I think the last sentence of it is, I'm supposed, if you're a homeowner, you want to demolish, I'm supposed to go to the property and actually see what you intend to demolish and how it is to adjoining properties, and again, public safety and safety to the people doing the demolition. I checked with the state, and what it does, if you are taking out that permit, you can hire someone to do the demolition. That person does not have to be licensed. That's another little curveball thrown at you, because if they're trying to say, if the homeowner doesn't take it down, can he hire somebody? And does that person have to be licensed? The answer is no. So that's why they have us, or they're supposed to have us be called onto the property to go over everything with the homeowner. And that homeowner has to be present for the whole demolition, and he has to carry the same insurances as a demolition contractor for liability. So
I believe that's about I think it's $1 million if I recall correctly, Bill.
yeah, exactly.
I think it's
I do have another question, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay, so Todd just proposed that we define historically significant to mean property that's on either a local registry or a state registry. Is that what he suggested?
Well, yeah, that is a category. Yes, he did say that. Yes.
Okay. So then because my concern was with paragraph 52C, where you have definitions. Historical property means any individual, building, structure, object, or site that is significant in the history, architecture, archaeology, and culture of the state of Connecticut, city of Norwalk, or the nation. I mean, how does a property owner even know that? But now, if we define historical property in the same way as we define historically significant as property that's contained within a registry, then now a homeowner knows, and that's the trigger, right? So, to Nora's point, it seems to me that that's a brighter line, that's a kind of clear distinction, and if that's the case, I don't really have an issue, because otherwise that provision is really quite vague. I don't know how a property owner is supposed to know that their property is significant historically or archaeologically or culturally. I just don't know how a person makes that determination that triggers their requirement to follow this procedure unless there is a bright line. 50 years is a bright line, but it's so the sole objection, so basically the sole basis for the objection shall be that the building structure or part thereof proposed to be demolished is not architecturally or historically significant, meaning it's not within the registry, right? So if you define it one way, you can't. It's got to be consistent. So in that paragraph D, the sole objection is that it's not.
Yeah, that was the typo we talked about that Josh just raised. The not has to come out, right?
Right.
And I talked about that.
Right. So the sole objection is that it is historically significant.
Right.
But
Architecturally or historically significant, correct, Ed?
Right. So I guess the 50 years triggers the applicant for this whole process, and then someone chooses to object on the grounds that the property is in some way architecturally or historically significant. Then that triggers the hearing and everything else. Is that the way it goes?
If somebody objects, yes.
Okay. And the hearing goes before the Norwalk Historical Commission. The Historical Commission may or may not request one, but the applicant can request one. And if the applicant requests one, the hearing has to be held within 30 days.
Right.
Is there a reason why it's 30 days as opposed to, let's say, 15 days?
We can make 15. I don't care. I mean, I just put that in, trying to put a reasonable mechanism on a volunteer commission.
Okay. It's a volunteer commission with a pretty significant say in whether or not someone, whether or not someone has to negotiate with them, or with the city. Who is the property owner negotiating with once a determination is made that the property is historically significant enough to trigger a stay?
They can wait out the 120 or 180 days, right? Or they can work with, and this has been happened in the past, they work with historical, whoever objected, to try and find a solution that makes everybody happy, right? Like incorporating some elements of the old building. That's been done.
So they have to go, so the hearing is before the commission, and presumably the commission is the entity that then they have to negotiate with. Who is it that they're negotiating with? Is it the building department?
No, it's to whoever filed the objection, right?
So a property owner has to negotiate with one person, let's say your neighbor or someone across.
Whoever says it's not, says what you're doing, you're tearing down an architecturally significant building. If somebody objects to that, that person keeps the objection in until it's withdrawn, right? So the only way that person's going to withdraw it is if they are comfortable that you know, that it's not architecturally significant. If somebody tells them it's not architecturally significant, in this case, the historical commission, or they are satisfied, it's not, the city doesn't necessarily get involved. And other than through the hearing, we've added in.
So one citizen negotiates with, has to negotiate with another citizen that's objective.
You say,
Or wait out,
negotiate.
or wait out 120 days or 120
Yeah.
days, or whatever it is. The,
I
you
mean,
know,
I'm listening, we're spending a lot of time on this, and I get, I mean, I hear everybody. I mean, I tend to disagree. I mean, this is an ordinance that's, you know, in throughout the state, but I hear what people are saying. They don't like it. We have this ordinance in our books today. What this started out is to make this easier for homeowners and to help Bill Ireland do his job. But I understand that people don't like it. And I would rather leave things the way they are, than my personal belief, than reduce to 50 years or anything. I mean, I just think we spent so much time on this thing.
my last comment, just to complete my thoughts on this, is that the big developers are going to be able to cut through this 180 days or 120 days or 90 days. They're going to be able to cut through all this stuff by speaking to the right people, meeting with the right players, and getting this thing done. It's really the smaller, either homeowner or smaller developers, if there is such a thing, smaller builders. Those are the people that are most likely to be adversely impacted by this, not the big guys. The big guys are going to be able to talk.
I don't think our experiences supports that, Ed. I mean, I think there have been.
The South Main thing. I think
I've seen.
There was an
Well,
objection.
that's not part of this. South Main's not. It's subject to a delay ordinance, but that.
Well, that's what this is, right?
But that's in a historic district. That may go to the state. That actually. But I mean, there have been instances.
But that was worked out pretty quickly.
But I'm going back to your idea of the smaller people. That Spinnaker is a big person, right?
Right.
But there have been developers of like one or two homes up in like it's off Flax Hill, where they tore down an historic building and they worked with whoever raised the objection. I think it was Norwalk Preservation Trust. They incorporated some elements of that building and they moved on. And it wasn't a big deal. So I think we got to keep this in perspective. I mean, this has been on the books for years. We're chasing ghosts here. I hear your point, but I think we really have to look what's real and what's not.
Well, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, what's real is that in the last 140 or so permit applications, there have only been 3 where this thing even applied, and they were all resolved. And 120 days seemed to work just fine. I mean, that's what there is.
So maybe we go with 120 days, but it does seem like we've put some things in here that are pretty important for protections. You know, some of your ideas, Ed, have been incorporated about good process for, violations and fines and hearings. I mean, I think that's improving the ordinance as it sits.
I mean, I can go with the 120.
Yeah, and then also it seems as though we're giving Bill some support by making sure that the demolition permits are, more rational.
Just to go back in the history, I mean, Bill has been with us, 40 years now? He's going to be here another.
Jesus, no, come on.
31. Bill's not going to be around forever. So the idea was to make this clear. There was no definition of demolition before, right? It was just to help Bill do his job. That was part of the impetus of doing it. It was also to make it easier for the homeowner to avoid having to file a publication. I mean, something in the newspaper, to avoid having to go through all these different steps and to streamline the process. That was the impetus of it. The 120 to 180 days was, I think, the only significant change the other way, if you want to call it even that significant. But all the other aspects were done to make this a more streamlined process. I get people don't want to go to 180. Okay. I feel strongly about the 50, but I'm one person. I don't know why we should be different than anybody else. I mean, there are people who are less than 50. I know that, or more than 50. But this is a national and state standard, and I don't know why we feel the need to be different. Our city historical heritage is really important. It's one of the things we tout in our POCD and a lot of public statements, how important our history is to Norwalk. Yet here we are saying, well, it's not that important. I don't know, my feelings. David, you haven't spoken.
Yeah, I don't want to flog a destroyed foundation, but I based on how commissions work in town, how things go. I feel like the 50 years bright line just makes sense. And I'm also curious, and this is an offline question probably for Mr. Bryant, is, where do you start looking at a property after 50 years? Do you start looking at whether that was historically significant? Does that property now go on the register? Do we have to keep up with that? Do we have to keep this list up that needs to be kept up for this? The 50 years, which has been there for, just makes sense for me. That's all. As far as the other stuff, I know it's, out of 140 applications for this, only 3 have ever triggered this thing. And the truth of the matter is whether it's 120 days or 180 days, somebody who wants to tear something down, waits that out and tears it down. I mean, I got to agree sort of with you, Tom. That's why I took my hand down a few times, is, I think that we're beating something up that doesn't need to be beat up.
Does anybody else feel a need to be heard before we take a vote to move it to public hearing? We want to move the 100. Does it make it feel better to people if we move to 120? Can you leave the 120 days? Does that materially change anybody's vote?
It's going to hearing. It's not going to council.
Right, hearing, public hearing.
Yeah. I think the $45,000 is a little much for me.
Well, Ed, if it goes to 120, 30,000, is that better for you?
I don't know that municipalities have the authority to fine people that much. I think there has to be a cap under state law, because I've never seen a fine I've never seen a fine that large.
I'll let Brian address that.
You're muted.
You're still muted, Brian.
Yeah, I just figured that out. So I went through all of the municipalities that have these demolition delay ordinances. And there was quite a few. There was at least a couple that I found, 4 that I have in my notes here, where they were charging $100 a day for each violation, and there was no cutoff at all. So, we're talking about a violation of $250 a day, which is allowed under 7-148 for each day that this is going on. What the total amount of that is, I've seen municipalities without cutoffs. So I haven't seen any that have cutoffs for these type of things like we're trying to implement here to give people who demolish improperly an end of the road, so to speak.
And I'm gonna go back to something else you raised about the that category of historic property. Brian, you put that in there. It wasn't in there before. I personally, if we took out C and we took out in both 55.2 and 55.4, that may address at least one of your concerns about what you thought it was a little ambiguous. Would that make you feel better?
55C, you said?
Well, yeah,
55.2C, Ed, and then 55.4C.
Yeah, that's that concept of historic property.
Yeah, and 55.4C, yeah.
Because Brian, you added that. I don't know if you feel strongly about
it. I think it's okay, but if we defined it as a property that is listed in either a local or state registry, I think that's fine.
Okay.
But historic, what's historic is kind of a matter.
So
I have no issue adding additional language that Mr. Bryant had mentioned during his comments. You just have to get that language and insert it.
Let me propose something here, and we can vote up or down to go to hearing. So first, it would be to change the definition of historic property means any individual building structure, object, or site that is listed in the state, or national register of historic places, right? That's what Todd said. We already have the Norwalk resources inventory listed in 55.4, so we don't need it there. So that would be change 1. change two, and this is one I didn't mention before, but it comes up in the context of E on 55(5)D. There's we make that 120 days. And then it says this is the fourth line, issue the permit until 120 days after the application is deemed filed or such earlier date that such objection is withdrawn, out of the words or deemed withdrawn, because we deem them withdraw it in E. Then 2 lines down, I take out the word not. In E, this is the last line. This is may issue recommendations on alternatives to demolition to the applicant instead of chief building officer, per Mr. Ireland's comment.
We have to switch 180 in F, Tom.
Okay, do that too. Any place is 180, go 120. In 55-7, add the word or between item 4 and then delete 5, the rest of that sentence. So, or for any structure determined to be a threat to public health by the director of health, period. In 55-8, make that $30,000. The 10% of the assessed value, Brian, you added that. I don't know if people, I don't feel strongly either way on that one, but it might be less, so it's the lesser of, so I presume people would be okay with that. And so that, I would propose that for vote now to go to public hearing.
I just,
Ireland.
while you're on that 55-8, if demolition is not commenced within 6 months after the permit, be considered null and void. Well, the state has granted extensions by written, that they have reason for what made it null for another 6 months. So I wouldn't say we could null and void it because the state could overrule us with a.
Do you want to say, okay, so maybe add at the beginning of that, unless otherwise.
Written request.
Well, isn't it otherwise determined by the state or something like that, or otherwise ordered by the state?
Written request, correct.
Well, when you say written request, where would you put, where would you
Well,
put
they
that?
have to, I mean, they'd have to give a reason for it with a written request why they want to extend their permit, not start on time.
And who would do that?
Applicant.
That goes to me and then I go to the state with it.
But it doesn't change anything until the order comes down from the state, right?
9 times out of 10, they do it on the phone to me. They said, yeah.
Okay, but it's an order to you, right, from the
Correct.
state?
Correct.
So I would say unless otherwise ordered by the state of Connecticut.
Approved by the state, right?
Approved, yeah.
Or extended by the city. Could the city not extend it?
I'm sorry,
or extended by the city. Could the city not
the
also?
city could extend it.
Okay, how about this? If demolition is not commenced within 6 months, such permit shall be deemed null and void unless extended by the city. Does that work?
For not more than another 6 months, then it's dead.
Yeah.
Unless, Brian, can you get that? Unless extended by the city for for no more than 6 months, additional months?
Well, but didn't we also say the state?
But the city
Well,
would, does the
The
city?
city would do it.
Yeah, the city would
can do it.
extend it because the state told them to. So with it,
Hey,
So if I said no, they'd write to the state and appeal what I said, basically, and get approved.
hey,
So-
oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, Brian, can you throw up the document on shared screen at some point? Because this is a lot of changes and I just want to be able to see it.
Yeah, I have to go back with Tom because the first cup, I
Okay.
haven't,
I mean,
I didn't
let's-
get the first couple, so.
I'll go through them again, Josh, but okay, so this will read, if demolition is not commenced within 6 months after issuance of a permit, such permit shall be deemed null and void unless extended by the city. This isn't really artful done for a period of not more than 6 additional months. Not that
Correct.
articulate.
Or just in which case the permit shall not be extended for
Yeah, okay.
more than an additional 6 months.
Yeah, okay, comma, in which case,
Hold on 1 second, Tom, where are we?
okay, so
55-8, whoops.
yeah, at the bottom, okay, so shall be null unless extended by the city, comma, in which case what such permit shall not be extended for more than an additional 6 months. Ed, is that right?
Unless extended by the city, yeah, in which case the permit shall not.
Can we just
be-
say for an additional 6 months?
Yeah,
Well,
extended
not
by
more.
for up to an additional 6 months.
shall not be extended for. Well, I don't think you need that. Shall not be extended for more than 6 months.
Yeah, unless extended by the city, which shall not, in which case the permit shall not be extended for more than an additional 6 months.
Yeah, more than an additional, yeah, do that for more than an additional 6 months. Yeah, that's good. All right, so let's go back up to the top.
Right, so I have that one. I've made all the changes to the 45,000. I got rid of 55.7 subsection 5. I changed the 120 to 180. I changed chief building official to applicant in 55.5E.
We'll go back to D. Did you get D? There are 3 changes in D.
I got the first part of, I got one of the Ds, which is the sole basis for such objection shall be that the building structure or part thereof proposed to be demolished is architecturally or historically significant. I didn't get the other part.
Okay, so then it's date that such objection is withdrawn or deemed to be withdrawn. In other words, or deemed to be withdrawn. Again, that refers to E where it would be deemed withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I got all those.
And go back to the top.
Yeah, what was before that?
That was in the right up on 55.4. That's
Right.
actually 2. I'm sorry, in 2.
2.
Go up to there. So, okay, historic property means any individual building, structure, object, or site that is listed on the, let me go back to my notes here, is listed on the state or national register of historic places.
And didn't we include, well, the inventory is listed below, so we don't have to list that here.
We don't need to do it.
Yeah.
Period.
Great.
Delete the
Property,
rest.
historic property means any individual building, structure, object, or site that is listed on the state or national register of historic places.
Right, so delete the rest.
Yeah. Done.
And you got 55.7. I was looking at something else, right?
55.7, yeah, I
got that,
removed,
okay.
put the or
Yeah, so
and got
that's
rid
it.
of that, yeah.
And then can we see 55.5D, because that's where we made some changes. Make sure that that's all right.
120 days is architecturally or historically significant, and that such objection is withdrawn or deemed to be withdrawn.
Yeah.
Good. And I want to make sure the not, I just was double checking on the
Yep.
not. Thanks.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep, all right.
What was,
So-
And
what
E
was,
has the applicant. The next one down is we changed that to applicant. I'm just
Applicant over chief building official, correct?
got it. Okay.
what, when we put deemed to be withdrawn, what would trigger deemed? What would
If you
make it
look at the next section, it's 55.5E, I believe.
Yeah.
And what it says, if the historical commission finds that it's not architecturally significant, then the objection shall be deemed withdrawn. So I just want to make sure that that triggers that D.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
and
So-
can we hold a hearing within 15?
Oh, yeah, you want to make that within 15 days you want to do? What do you want to do? You said
You know, let's make it 21 days just to give a little more time, but I think 30 days, you could
Okay.
always, abuse that.
Is that an E, Ed?
That's
Yeah.
right there, where your
Yeah.
cursor is.
Okay, so we're getting rid of 30, we're putting 21 days, okay,
Yeah.
Yes.
okay. I think those are all the changes.
Can
And
I
you got,
just mention one more?
Yeah,
We're calling, if you go to the very first page and everything referring to it as a demolition permit, and it's not, it's an intent to demolish.
where is that, Bill?
That's a good catch. Thank you.
It's throughout the whole thing, actually.
Hold on, let me take it off and see how many demolition permits we have here,
Yeah.
hold on.
Do we
Yeah.
need to define it? Does
Well, so
that?
Bill, that's the way it is in you and I talked about that, I think. It's in the way it is in the current ordinance. So I'm hesitant to make that change here. Why don't we look at that? Because we could, Brian, we can make that change in the public, after the public hearing, right? Because that's.
Yes, that would be a very minor change, because we're talking about, it's either a demolition permit or a notice of intent to demolish. We're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, so
Yeah, let's be careful about that. That tonight might be too fast to go through that. I
yeah,
agree.
Bill, you and I can talk about that and get
Okay.
that right.
It only, just so everyone knows, it only appears 5 times in the draft ordinances currently thing, so we could find that pretty quick and make those changes if necessary, if that's where you guys are going for the next meeting.
So let's fine tune it and make sure we really mean it every time we do it.
Because we've had quite a few people think that's their demolition permit once they go through the process and no objections, and then they start the demolition. They come right in to take one out, but they say, God, that's not what it says, so
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
let's be clear about it.
that's all.
Okay,
I'm
so
mo-
with all of those changes, do we feel like we're in a pretty good place now? Should we have a motion to,
I move as amended to go to public hearing. As changed, as revised.
all in favor? I don't know about Nora and David. David, people aren't on this. So all in favor, the people I have in favor are David, Tom, Josh, Ed, Lisa. I don't see Mr. Meeks on this anymore.
He said he was leaving, so.
He was leaving. Okay, so anybody who's voting against, please raise their hand.
Nora.
Nora is against. Okay, so it moves to public hearing for our next meeting. So great. Thank you very much. That was a lot of hard work and interesting for lawyers, and I hope the public stayed with us.
We'll get a
on the
copy of it, soon, all the changes that we made tonight.
Yes, Brian,
What's
would you
that?
mind sending us everybody a draft of the changes with the, the green markings that what we did tonight, so people can take a look at it prior to the next meeting, just in case. we have more
I'll send it tonight. I'll send it tonight to everyone after the meeting's over, because we're gonna have to put together the legal notice of public hearing.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, we want to keep Brian busy tonight, but not later because he's actually on vacation. He's kind to help us out tonight. All right, Sabrina. So now you're an expert on demolition, and thank you,
Right.
Mr. Ireland. Yep.
Thank you,
are
Bill.
set.
Thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much,
you
Bill.
so much for sticking in with us
Thank
so
you,
late. I
Bill.
can't believe it's 9 o'clock, but your help is really, really helpful. We really
Thank you, Bill.
Okay,
Okay, Sabrina. So what I was going to say, what our next situation is, we're going to look at the Arts and Cultural Commission. We're making an amendment to what is here. This is very much of a very first draft. I don't know if anybody really had a chance to take a look at it prior to Sabrina and Jess getting it to us. We so appreciate you guys doing the first draft. And I've already apologized to Sabrina and Jess because us lawyers, as you have seen, Sabrina and Jess, we get into the nitty gritty of the ordinance. So I hope your feelings are not going to be hurt when we take your ordinance and turn it upside down and backwards. And we've had a little bit of a conversation today already about some of the things that we were wanting to address. For instance, we always put the whole reason for, sorry, something blowing up on my computer. Purposes and duties usually come up first and things like that. So what we're really going to talk about today, just with this, is the general reason for what we're doing, some of the things that you've thought about, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of this ordinance at our next meeting, when we'll have probably a second draft that we'll have worked through with Sabrina and Jess.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here so late. I won't keep you too long. So I did give a presentation to you guys at the last meeting, which went over a lot of this stuff. Same thing at the Economic and Community Development Committee meeting as well. So the impetus of this is really to spice up the Arts Commission a little bit by having different members that may not originally have been able to participate in the meetings be able to participate. And then the second and the really big purpose of this is really to raise funds for the arts and also to solicit donations for the arts and arts related events in the city. We currently don't have a mechanism to do that. So creating this Arts and Cultural District not only will give the Arts and Cultural District members the ability to solicit funds and enter fundraising activities. They can also apply for grants on the city's behalf and as an organization themselves. So a lot of these things are really the impetus of doing this whole kind of revamp of the Arts Commission and creating this Arts and Cultural District. And as Lisa mentioned, she's already proposed, some changes, some questions, but anything that you guys have that you want in there or something that we should be considering, please let us know. And we're happy to do whatever you think is necessary because you guys are the ordinance experts. So we're happy to be here and happy to work on this with you guys.
Just to give the committee a little bit of a sense of some of the things that occurred to me when I went through it, as there's a discussion of non-voting members, who they are, how did the non-voting members get chosen? How did they get kicked off? How many should they be? Should there really even be a common council member? How long should their term be? Some of the other questions were, should the mayor appoint the chairman? Should the commission vote for their chairman? The duties and responsibilities feel like there could be some consolidation there. And certainly, and Josh's ears will prick up. It seems as though if this committee could actually solicit grants and donations, wow, that sounds like a special account to me. And now we have a little bit of experience writing up special accounts for cannabis and trees and whatnot. So we ought to also put together some kind of special account that would hold those types of grants and donations that this commission could offer. So those are just some of the things that occurred to me when I was looking at it once over lightly. I'm sure that some of our other committee members might have some thoughts. Perhaps we can all share them with Sabrina and Jess, or perhaps me as chair, and we'll consolidate those questions. And in the next month, perhaps we can work on another draft. But I wondered if anybody else had some initial reactions or comments that they'd like to share with Sabrina and Jess. Looks like everybody's wiped out from talking about demolition.
The only thing that I had one thing that caught my eye. I agree with Lisa's questions about the selection formation. Those she spoke to them. I don't feel the need to do it again. Under the purpose and duty section, specifically about the grants, I know that sometimes the city has gotten into some thorny issues where random people are applying for grants and it gets a little haywire. And I don't know if you had in mind, because I believe it just says in here, like basically like seek grants. I'm for some reason stumbling on where it actually says it.
I think it's in the last section where it lists the responsibilities.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, but it doesn't kind of bear down on like who's actually responsible for the grant process and the grant management. And like that is something that typically is not done by a commission of, frankly, lay people, and is usually supervised and managed by someone on the city side. And so I just want to make sure that in whatever final formation this is, that it's clear that the city is ultimately managing the process of seeking and soliciting and managing any grant money we receive.
That's where I was going to with the whole idea that we need is like a special account such as tree or cannabis where there's oversight.
That, right. I mean, that from a financial, right. But I'm saying like, in terms of like, I know like Lamont and his team have a whole, professionalized grant writing process. I mean, it's not just Lamont, it's the, departments across the city. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't random committee members just filling out grant applications and sending them out. Because I think we've gotten in trouble in the past for that sort of thing.
Yeah, normally how we've been operating at this moment in time, if there's an arts related grant, the Office of Business Development and Tourism as their staff has been managing and applying for them. And I don't foresee that changing. Just if this specific arts and cultural district had any grants that they specifically were applying to as a organization of the city, so as a separate entity, it would be through the Arts and Cultural District Commission rather than through the Business Development and Tourism Office, even though I would still be their staff. So we would still, as the Business Development and Tourism team, as their staff, would still be that.
You'd just be wearing sort of a different hat.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
to speak.
Exactly.
Okay.
Great. Mr. Hubelman, you have a question?
Thank you, Chairman Shahan. Yeah, that was just a question I had is, and the way that reads right now, there's two separate things there. You're applying for grants, but you also talk about expenditure of funds. And I think the things like that need to be separated out. And is the expenditure of funds a grant program or is it some other program? Because are people applying for grants for the arts through this organization, or is the commission itself applying for grants to come into the city of which you're going to expend those funds in some way? I think those are the things that I reacted to for clarity. I was also curious as to where the number 6 came up from for the committee members, that it was 6 members, because I know when you were before us before, it was a larger number. I think it was an uneven number at that point, as well as you had talked about those members being that could be, people involved in the arts in Norwalk, not necessarily a resident. And I see now you guys wrote in resident, and I'm just curious where that shift happened in there as well.
So we had to, at the direction of the mayor's office, we wanted to include in ordinances to keep it consistent that all members of commissions were residents. But we do have the section that has the ex officio members that does include the non-resident portion, which is what Lisa kind of mentioned before in some of her listed questions, that we would say for ex officio members who are non-voting but can still participate in conversation, they could be appointed and still have, you know, some say and involvement, but they wouldn't be a voting member.
I understand that. I'm just curious as to, from that standpoint, and I think it's something that we should, you know, look at from the other commissions as well, perhaps, that there is a place for people who do business within the community, who have an expertise within the community to be a part of some of these other commissions as well. And that it's not, we're not just talking about residents, we're also talking about people who are, you know, conducting business within the city and have that to be able to bring some of that expertise on a voting level as well. It's something that perhaps is a larger question to have, but it sparked for me because I initially responded to that when you guys brought I thought that was a good idea. My only concern at that time was how we find a certain balance within that. And that's why I was curious to why that was shifted. All right, thank you.
No worries. And to address your grants question that was at the beginning, so the enabling legislation allows the Arts and Cultural District Commission to do both of those functions. So to be able to grant out money as well as accept funds. Not saying that's something that we will definitely do, but the enabling legislation allows us to be able to do that if we have.
We just need to make sure that within the structure of the ordinance, it's very clear the difference in the duties as we tear this apart. But thank you very much for the work you guys did on this.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
Nora, do you have a comment?
There's one very small point, and I recognize that this looks like it's in the current ordinance, but it does seem odd to me that a staff member could be hired for this sort of arts and cultural district, as opposed to the city sort of hiring a staff member that's then assigned to work on this. And I'm just flagging, I think it's, you know, like I said, it looks like a somewhat remnant language and an attempt to sort of adapt that. But I think it would make more sense, you know, for it to sort of be at the mayor's discretion, for instance, or, you know, simply point C to, you know, like, I'm not even sure if we really need B is a little bit my question there. So I'm just flagging that to sort of think about how it makes sense in terms of staffing.
That'd be a great point. Maybe you could send us a little note to remind us to take a look at that when we're combing through it.
Yep.
Any other first impressions before we move on? I know it's 9:15, it's getting late. I'm respectful of people's evenings. Sounds good. Okay, we'll move on to the leaf blower ordinance. So Sabrina and Jessica, thank you so much for staying late and hanging in there with us. And we'll be talking to you soon to flip over the next draft.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sabrina and
everyone.
Jessica.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go to the leaf blower ordinance. And again, let me just say a few things about this. First, I just want to introduce the leaf blower ordinance to the committee. I should note when we draft ordinances, we usually, before we come to committee, sit down with all of the different departments that might be impacted by one of our regulations and get comments back from whomever they are. In this case, because of budgets season and other priorities, we haven't had a chance to sit down with the city, but we did get, we did sit down with them. Tom and I sat down with them in December, and they expressed general support of this ordinance, but they wanted to work in and give us some comments on our first draft ordinance in particular. So we'll be doing that in the next week to 10 days, and our next draft will definitely incorporate their comments. We plan to speak with DPW, Recs and Parks, the health department, and the conservation groups, really pretty much this week. Just to respond to some of the comments that we heard during public comment. Some people already know this on our common council committees, but we generally do between 20 and 30 hours research on these types of things. We have experts come to speak with us to give us background on these types of issues. And in fact, we did speak with some local landscapers to make sure that the ordinance seemed to be rational and reasonable in their terms. So I don't want anybody to think that we hadn't really gone through our proper due diligence in that. And then also, for the benefit of new members of our committee, as well as for members of the public, who missed the testimony on November 4th. I just wanted to give a quick summary of some of the reasons why people consider leaf blower ordinances. More than 200 cities, towns, and at least one state are enacting these restrictions on the gas-powered leaf blowers. And that's because they really view them as a important safety issue for residents, as well as something just that creates peace in the neighborhood. The health and ecological concerns regarding the use of gas leaf blowers focus on three main impacts. The first we heard a lot about is gas leaf blowers are a major source of toxic emissions and pollutants. These toxins and emissions include hydrocarbons, VOCs, known carcinogens such as benzene, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, foreign particulate matter. We talked about that earlier. They contribute to the ozone ground layer level. California estimates that the use of gas leaf blowers and other garden equipment creates more pollution than is caused by vehicle use in the entire state. The second important thing that gas blowers are known to do is produce a lot of noise. They typically produce between 85 and 115 decibels. This low frequency noise travels more than 50 feet and penetrates walls and windows. For the CDC and OSHA standards, workers are at risk of hearing loss if they're exposed to 100 decibels for 15 minutes. And we know that a lot of the workers in this city, go hours and hours every day with this noise. And then the third thing is the dispersal of dangerous materials and destruction of garden soil. We've talked a lot about that too. As Jim Shell said from the Oak Hills, these gas blowers run about 200 miles per hour, and they aerosolize pesticides, herbicides, animal feces, heavy metals, the very gasoline from the machines themselves. This is all very dangerous. And machines also desiccate the soil, kill healthy organisms and bacteria, and contribute to the loss and destruction of vegetation and habitat for birds, small mammals, and beneficial ground nesting pollinators. And a lot of times when you're confronted with a choice, when you're trying to protect the environment, you don't have an easy fix or a viable alternative. But in this case, we do have an alternative, and that's electric blowers and small changes to people's gardening practices. And I encourage anyone to go back to our November meeting and watch the YouTube to go into a deeper dive of both what the risk of gas leaf blowers are, as well as what alternative gardening practices are that are better for the environment. But what I want to do, and I don't think that we need to go through a lot of debate today because there will be changes to this leaf blower, but I'll just walk through the leaf blower quickly, and I can answer questions of how directionally we chose to go. As you guys all know, we start with our purposes, so that's embedded and based on the science. Definitions are pretty straightforward. Section 3 talks about the prohibition of the gas blowers themselves. We chose to wait 3 years to ban gas powered leaf blowers on properties of 3 acres and less. We took 4 years to ban the use of gas leaf blowers on 4 acres or more. And we chose those years, 3 and 4 years, because a lot of these gas leaf blowers have useful lives of 3 to 5. So people will be replacing these leaf blowers in that period of time. So we wanted to have people have the time to kind of turn over the life cycles of these machines, and as they buy new machines, to buy more electric. Also, as people spoke a lot about tonight, we're hoping that the technology comes to us, and that, there was talk about how some of these leaf blowers only last 30 minutes. Well, those are some of the older models. A lot of the newer models actually last a lot longer. One of the things that we say that we want to incorporate right away is required safety features for the use of leaf blowers. And actually, Ms. Loratelli made a good point today. We hadn't really thought about eye safety. We should have. We should probably make a change to this to include eye safety, but we definitely have, we're requiring headphones, and we're requiring the N95 masks. We'll define those particularly when we talk to the health department about what the right names for those masks are, but we want to protect the workers who are carrying these machines around all day long from hearing loss and pollution. And then another thing when we were doing our research is it does seem really as though best gardening practices suggest that leaf blowers really are not needed in the summer months. So we're trying to restrict the use of leaf blowers for the shoulder seasons, when one is cleaning up the garden, getting ready for summer, and then putting away leaves for the end of the season. One idea we had was that, there's no reason to ban leaf blowers to be used on impervious surfaces. People like to keep their parking lots, their driveways, their pool decks and other impervious surfaces clean. So we don't really have, we don't ban the use of leaf blowers for those purposes. Operating hours was something else that was mentioned a lot in our public comments today. I think that Tom and I would say that we shot down the middle of the fairway when we looked at what different jurisdictions are doing. We thought between 8 and 6 during weekdays, not including state and federal holidays. Saturdays 10 to 5 for people who work during the week and need to tend to their gardens during the weekends. And then Sunday we shortened it just a little bit to 10 to 4. We have an exception and a suspension of the leaf ban, gas leaf blower ban for anytime there might be an emergency such as storms, hurricanes, other types of extreme weathers when one might need to use it. So that is just once over lightly. And again, this hasn't been vetted with the city exactly. So there'll probably be some changes when we come back to committee. And I see Josh has his hand up.
So I didn't know if this was an appropriate time to just lay out a couple broad thoughts or not.
How about it?
Okay, so I think I totally get and I absolutely support regulating, obviously, dates and times. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you heard from public comment tonight. I think it came up in our previous presentation that people want that, and I totally get it. And I think we should do it. The part that I'm concerned about, and not necessarily because of what was said at public comment tonight, but I am a little concerned about the date set for the prohibition, because I am worried whether, frankly, there is credence to the argument that electric leaf blowers may not be where we want them to be 3 years from now. And we're just kind of taking a guess and we're just kind of hoping. And I don't know if that's true or not. But I do wonder if we're going to run into a problem and all of a sudden now, a future council is going to have to deal with, or just revise and just get rid of it. The other thing that I just sort of wanted to note more broadly is obviously people have leaf blowers. Currently, I don't know, I do recognize, especially having worked on cannabis in the past, I mean, we deal with ordinances with immense enforcement challenges. And I do wonder what we are thinking about in terms of capacity for enforcement challenges, because I can just see people hear about this ordinance and there are lots of, or not even lots of, but there could be, various calls or people trying to sort of selectively enforce because they just don't like their neighbor or something like that. I don't know if the enforcement piece is something that you've thought about or sort of explored. And I'm also the effective prohibition date does concern me broadly.
So the enforcement part is always the trick, right? So that's one of the things that we do. We are going to be speaking with the city about how it might be done. A lot of the, I don't want to say that we have a lot of environmental ordinances that are aspirational and educational in mind. To some degree, that is the case. But, there are really serious health effects. And everybody who sits next to anybody who passes through the air that a gas leaf blower produces is at a health risk. And that's, we just have to sort of deal with that. And the other thing is that this is one of the low hanging fruits we have a lot of talk about getting to be carbon neutrality, picking our dates. One easy way to clean up the air in Norwalk is to address this. So yeah, it's inconvenient. Some of these ordinances are inconvenient. Some of the changes we're going to have to make our environment are inconvenient, but this is something that's important. It's really important. And if I need to bring in more expert advice to reassure our council members about the dangers that these machines pose, I'm happy to do it. If I need to bring in more landscapers who are using these machines to good effect, I'm happy to do it. And we could definitely bring in people at the next meeting to give everybody more perspective on this. But this is a serious health issue and we're all at risk, and it's pretty rough to think that, these machines are being used and our air is being made more poor, and we're just gonna like let people get asthma because we just don't want to be inconvenienced by having to spend a little bit more time using an electric leaf blower, which, by the way, we're told the electric leaf blowers are actually more effective now than what was, perhaps talked about today from landscapers themselves. Ed, you've got a question?
Yeah, sorry. I think that I'm going to take off my hand because I tend to leave it up. I think that the list that that you provided that I've seen of the municipalities that have passed this leaf blower ordinance, I just took a random one like Newton, Massachusetts, and I just sort of Googled it because some of these seem quite extreme and complete, and so I think when considering it, it's not enough to to say that Newton, Massachusetts, for instance, has passed a complete ban on these things. But you should look at, we need to look at what the consequence of that is. In other words, what the fallout has been since 2017. And the very first article that comes up is that people are having a real difficult time with it, including landscapers leaving the city and not, wanting to work there and things like that. So I think we should look, and I intend to look into these places that have passed either absolute bans or very restrictive bans to see what the people have, what's happened, what the fallout has been in those towns, because we may want to understand that to maybe soften or change or adjust, what it is we do here, because we now have some history about this stuff apparently, and it's not always a result that we assume, apparently.
No, and it's true, like 2017 leaf blowers, not the same technology now, that's almost 7 years ago, and everything does keep getting better.
Was a 2022 article.
Oh, okay,
2020. It's still going on. Yeah, so it's important to what we do. Apparently there is history, there is some fallout and very recent stuff that we need to consider. And we now have sort of a good sampling of that with the list that you provided. And so I just think that we should all look at that and see how we can tweak this based on that, on that fallout.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention, and this was something that Nora made the point at our last meeting, and we were all thinking it was a great idea. We do have some resources in Norwalk for small businesses, and we don't have Jess and Sabrina on anymore, but I think that a program is called Kiva, and that's an opportunity for small businesses to be able to take zero interest loans to get new equipment and things like that. And so that's important. And, I don't think that it should be diminished about how this is such, this is a worker safety issue. I mean, these people who are working on these machines day in and day out, when you talk to the landscapers who don't use it, the first thing that they mention is how happy their workers are that they don't go home with headaches every day and feeling sick to their stomachs. So there is several elements on this, and it might be actually a benefit to the landscaping industry to help them make this transition. Other thoughts? We still have one more agenda item, so I'm conscious of that. And I know that, we're kind of looking at an ordinance that will definitely go through a big change after we talk to all the city departments. No other thoughts? Poor Mr. Livingston. He's back on the
This I think will be shorter than the last discussion, maybe.
Okay, good. We are now going to speak about the Oak Hills. We're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 73, Article 1, Oak Hills Park Authority.
Yeah, so as we discussed last meeting, the purpose of this amendment is to put the head of Recreation and Parks on the Oak Hills Authority. I mean, the logic is pretty clear. I think Oak Hills being one of our largest parks, it makes sense to have the person in charge of the parks in the city be a member of that commission. So what this does is it appoints him as a full member. It's not a ad hoc or ex officio. It's a full member with voting rights to be a permanent member of the commission. And that's really what the amendments to section 73-2 are. The one thing that's in there is the director of recreation and parks. I have in bracket or their designee. I would take out the brackets just to have their designee. We did talk at last meeting about the possibility of putting council members on that. David, you and I spoke about that. I think my feeling now, and this obviously this is me, whatever the committee wants to do is fine. I thought we kind of go this way first and see how this works. I think some of the council members have expressed concern about being stretched too thin. And I worry about having another obligation for council members when people aren't always going to meetings they're supposed to now. So obviously that can be changed now or in the future, but I just note that we did think about that after our discussion. So I just note that. And that's the gist of the change. I did make a minor tweak in the end, in the last section, which is on the notice about the fees, 73-10. I took out the requirement to publish legal notice in a citywide publication. I did that just because I don't want to be any implication we're tied to newspapers, right? So it just says they have to give notice in the same period of time, but it doesn't have to be a citywide publication. The way we normally do in the city is provide legal notice, and that's what we do for every other meeting in the city. Ed.
Yeah, what's the rationale for having the parks, the person on the Oak Hills? Is there has an issue come up, or is it simply just?
Well, I think there's no specific issue to my knowledge, but in conversations with the mayor's office and with Robert, it was deemed appropriate that again, since this is one of the city's largest parks, it makes sense to have, and it goes two ways, by the way, to have somebody who is familiar with the city's parks be a member of this commission, not only to learn about the operation of the park and weigh in on it, but also to offer his expertise to how the park's operating. And I think so. Again, it's not intended to be punitive by any means. It's not intended to address a specific problem other than giving, in this case, Robert, better information and about the city's parks as a whole as we develop a master plan, to have some more input into this. He's, by the way, I'm not saying we wrote this just for Robert, but Robert does have a lot of experience with municipal golf courses, but it also enables him to get and provide his expertise. So that's the rationale.
And I think that the additional thing is that this is a really important city asset, and every single tree and bush is part of city property. And it really would be important to have the Department of Park and Recs or make sure that the property is being properly managed.
Yeah, I mean, this is
the authorities are authorities separate and apart from the city, or not completely, but they're separate from the city for reasons. Once you inject a city employee into an authority, is there something we need to be concerned about legally with that type of intermingling?
Well, Brian, Brian had looked at this, but I'll let him respond. But I will note that he is 1 out of 9, right? So he couldn't carry the day, but it's a fair point. Brian, I don't know if you want to comment.
I'd have to, if somebody can send me a specific request, I can go take a look at it. In terms of the Recreation and Parks Director being on this, I could take a look at, I needed to conduct further research. So if somebody can send me the request, I'll take a look at it.
I mean, it's 1 out of 9, but he has an outsized voice, in it. So that's, that's something, but still that intermingling, like I know that the Water Pollution Control Authority has the mayor on it, I believe. And I think it also has a city council member.
Yeah, it has the council president and the head of public works.
And there are other commissions that also have common council members, like the Maritime Commission that sits on.
Right.
So I think it's really,
but a city employee is different, right? I mean, is there an authority that has a city employee on it?
Again, I can go back and take a look at the authorities to see if that exists. I did a quick look on it, but I'd have to go back and do more research.
Tom, when you did research on stormwater authorities, didn't those have council members or some sort of city official on them?
Lisa, did you look at that?
You know, that's
I
an
don't
interesting
remember.
question, and I don't remember, there's 2 or 3.
I thought there
If I
were, but
recall,
maybe,
I think so.
I think so too. David, did you have an answer to that?
if I recall, when I remember looking at this about 6 months ago, going through it, that statutorily, the city has the right to create an authority, to manage an asset, basically. But the city, it can actually emanate out of a department of the city.
Right, that's
So
correct.
it could emanate out of Public Works and be a Public Works department, but the authority becomes, separate but equal.
but that's not, but that
It's
wasn't
not,
Ed's
it's
question.
not completely
Ed's-
separated.
All right,
Yeah.
let me tell you what I found, because I did find something when going back through my emails.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
been a
remember what the
while.
number is.
The WPCA, this is section 113-3 of our city code. I can send this to anybody who wants it. The WPCA shall consist of 9 members. They shall include the mayor, the chairman of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, president of the Common Council, the chairman of the Public Works Committee of the Common Council, 1 other member of the Common Council, 4 at-large members appointed by the mayor and approved by the Common Council.
But
And then
none
it
of,
talks about
none of those are employees of the city, though.
Right, no, exactly. I'm just letting you know what I found on the WPCA. The director of public works and the director of financial service ex officios without the right to vote as to the WPCA.
Right, the CFO, the CFO is
Yes.
is an employee of the city, but
Correct.
But he's an ex officio.
Ex officio, yeah. DPW and finance are both ex officio without the right to vote on the WPCA. I can go take a look and see if I can locate anything else before the next meeting.
David, do you have something else? I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't take my hand down, but I remember I've got to find it. I'll find it in the cogs.
Okay, great.
Oh, Ed, do you believe that that's a significant enough issue to hold off going to public hearing with this? Or, I mean,
we should answer that question because.
well, I thought we had, to be honest with you, but Brian, I thought you'd looked at it. I apologize. I thought you had looked at that.
Oh, that question's come up, yeah. I don't know. I mean, we create an authority to keep them separate and apart from the city, and then we inject ourselves by having a member of the executive, if you will, the head of a department, as part of it. As long as that person's a voting member, I think you've blurred the line a little bit.
How would you suggest that we keep our city assets safe, though? Like, it's just, every
Well,
single.
see, I don't think it's been an issue so far, but I mean,
But it has actually. There have been some issues of tree removals that have been problematic, and so, and we don't really know what the management plan for the property is. So there is some concern.
Well, when we have the parking authority, there's always like the city council gets blamed for, the ticketing practices of the parking authority, but that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be separate. And even though they get the blame, unfortunately, it's designed precisely to be separate, and that the city has no say in it. So that once you put someone on an authority with a vote and with an outsized voice, because they are in fact the head of the parks, suddenly I think you've begun to unravel that separation. Not unraveled it, but you've merged that line. I think the people that run the golf course should run the golf course. I mean, I don't know where the city, if we want to make it a city course and not have it be a course that's run by an authority, then let's do that. But then we'll have to play, then we'll have to do, then everyone's going to be an employee of the city, and so on and so forth. But I just don't, my concern is to inject ourselves into something that was specifically created to be independent.
Yeah, I listen, it's late. I hear your point. I don't necessarily agree with it all, but I hear your point. Why don't we defer consideration of this, given the late hour and Brian is on vacation till next meeting, just to confirm that we even have the legal authority to do it, because obviously if we don't, we don't. That's my proposal to table it.
I agree. Let's find out
So
the
do
answer
I.
to that. Yeah, and then figure out how else we might make sure that there is some kind of understanding for the city about how an important asset's being managed.
Yeah.
That's good.
I
All
mean, I
right.
think it's not something that's that time sensitive. Just do it when we do it.
Great.
Make a
So,
motion to adjourn.
yeah, motion to adjourn 9:40, all in favor. I think that Nora would probably agree.
All right,
So
good
so we're
night.
adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in here so late. We had a lot of good discussion on important issues. Appreciate it.
Good night.
Thanks,
care.
everybody. Have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.